City of Mound, Eric Overstead.
Yeah, I'm calling from the Central Minnesota News Network. We're researching the case of the Orono mayor clearing vegetation from his shoreline. We just talked to Sarah. We asked some questions of her, and we can ask some questions of you as well. Do you happen to know, is the Mound code different from the Orono code regarding the shoreline?
I think it is, yes.
Okay. Do you have anything in your code about the screening of structures as viewed from the lake?
So our code states that trees on the private lake shore can be removed to establish a view from the principal structure. Obviously, if bluff or other conditions exist, that language gets more complicated, but generally we consider the activities on the private lake shore to be private. We do not require screening of the building as viewed from the lake to the land, and we allow for creating a view from the land to the lake.
So it sounds like Orono has an additional element.
I believe when that is the case, yes.
Okay. I left a message with Jeremy Barnhart to figure out what this screening of structures means. So it sounds like according to Orono code, you can't take down greenery if it's going to make the structures on land, whether it's the house or garage or whatever, be more visible. Is that what it means?
You would have to get that interpreted by the city of Orono.
Okay, so it just sounds like it's something that might be different in the code then. And have you ever met Mayor Walsh?
I have met him, yeah.
Have you ever worked with him or?
Not extensively on anything interagency or community to community. Obviously, I've interacted with him at various activities and events that celebrate, things going on in our communities as we share so much between us, but nothing formal.
Have you ever consulted Orono regarding an enforcement issue, a code enforcement issue?
I'm not aware that we've reached out to any of the neighboring communities unless it's something very specific to a municipal boundary issue.
Okay, thanks. I really appreciate your time answering my question.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Good morning, this is Sarah. Can I help you?
Yes, I'm calling from the Central Minnesota News Network.
Hi, how are you?
Good. See, I wanted to know if we could ask you some questions about an ongoing case.
I can sure try. Our protocols are for public relations, and everything starts with the city manager.
Yes, sure. You had had a discussion with Jeremy Barnhart of Orono, and sent him an email regarding the clearing of the bluff by Orono Mayor Denny Walsh. And you had sent an email to Jeremy Barnhart regarding your estimate of the situation. Do you recall that?
Oh, an evaluation of undergrowth, sure.
Yes. You said you didn't consider it a violation. You referred to it as maintenance. Can you explain more about that?
Well, how we would evaluate that is, first of all, looking at the information that was provided, is that the vegetation that's there is still in the ground. And first of all, we don't consider buckthorn and removal of dead or diseased limbs or brush that's not subject to our ordinance requirements. You can take those out as a maintenance type of activity. How we looked at that is when you vegetation specifically along the shore often has to have maintenance so that it continues to grow and flourish. And so what was done is that they cleaned it up, and what my comment was is it would be important to take a look at it again once the spring season and the bloom out happens, because it'll look completely different. But we would consider that to be, if I was going to evaluate, I would look at that as a maintenance type of activity, because it wasn't all removed and it's going to be something else. It was simply evaluated and maintained so that it can continue to grow.
Did you visit the site yourself? In your email, you referenced that you had spoken with Jeremy Barnhart as well. Do you recall what that discussion covered?
Just summarizing what I had forwarded in the email as well.
Is Mound code different from Orono code regarding the shoreline?
Again, I don't know their code word by word. What we have is we have regulations related to alterations in shoreland and in bluff and or shoreland areas, and it talks about what their site alteration activities.
Well, Jeremy had posted some of the Orono code, so like you said, I'm not sure if it's the same as Mound code. But one thing in there drew my attention. I've left him a message, but I haven't heard back yet. What I'm wondering about this particular part of the code is that it says, so limited clearing of shrubs is allowed, provided that the screening of structures or vehicles or other facilities as viewed from the water, assuming leaf-on conditions, isn't substantially reduced. Does that mean that you can't be taking stuff down if it makes the house more visible from the lake? Is that what that's saying?
Well, how we look at it is the intent of that is that everything's not flat grass ground. The intent is that you don't clear a thing to improve a view, but you can take limited clearing or cleaning activities to create a view. But the whole point is that you don't want to slash down the shoreland.
So the part about like as viewed from the water, does that refer to the people on the lake having more green view? Is that what that's talking about? Is that what that means? That like your neighbors across the lake see more green instead of a house?
Viewed from the water. So when you're driving by, the intent is that you don't have a complete open view. It's meant to be, kind of speckled with green. There is meant to be maintained of vegetation along the shoreline. But again, some of those conditions already exist. Some of them are conditions that might be enhanced, adding trees, adding shrubbery, like any landscaping, generally landscaping needs to be maintained. And so that's where our evaluation came from when I looked at it.
So I'm wondering if maybe the Mound code doesn't have this part about the screening of structures, because I'm just still not quite clear what it means. What if that means that the people when they're riding in their boats or the people across the lake, that they see more greener. That's what I just wonder what that means.
Oh, so what it means is when viewed from summer leaf-on conditions. So what it's meant to be is you don't consider that like in spring or in winter when there's no green space. I always refer to it as selective removal or selective cutting and selective trimming rather than taking out a natural strand of trees. And what I looked at was the vegetation is still in the ground and it's going to come back. It's just as a maintenance activity, they maintained it so that it can come back.
Do you ever contact the Lake Minnetonka Conservation District in determining what follows along, what doesn't?
Well, Lake Minnetonka Conservation District generally deals with boats and boat traffic and on lake-related activities rather than shoreline management.
What about the Minnehaha Watershed District? Do you ever contact them?
Minnehaha Creek Watershed District is a common agency that's contacted with activities related to reconstruction, to site disturbance, whether or not you need an erosion control permit, those types of things.
Have you ever consulted the DNR or the Minnesota Attorney General in making any decisions?
The DNR is often provided copies of our land use applications because we are in a shoreland area, so any application for a land use or a project of redevelopment, they are on our routing list.
Have you ever met Mayor Walsh?
I have not.
Okay. Well, those are my questions, although I think that Orono code is a little bit different from Mound, it looks like, so that's what I left a message with Jeremy Barnhart to speak with him.
Well, why don't I also refer you to Eric, because as talked about earlier, he is our public relations person, point person for the city.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you.
All righty, thank you.
Yeah, bye.
Oh, okay, sure.
Yeah.
What can I help you with?
Yeah, well, I spoke with the city of Orono lawyer, so that gave me a few more questions I want to ask you. And the question is, so he explained how you were asked to do it due to conflict of interest and such and such. But when you did it, when you made your evaluation, did it give you a copy of the Orono code to work from?
Are you referring to the email response that I had, or the email that I was provided from Mr. Barnhart? Is that what you're asking? I'm sorry, I'm not following.
So when you did your evaluation, to determine if it was a violation or not, did you? So they gave you photos to work from. Is that right?
I was provided an email, and Jeremy highlighted the section of the code, and my response was how I evaluated based on what I saw on the photo.
Mm-hmm. So when the code speaks about the screening of structures as viewed from the water, can you explain what that means?
Well, okay, so I guess maybe I want to start back about the difference how I evaluated it is that I did not view that as a clearing of trees or shrubs, but I viewed it as a maintenance activity. And therefore the activity, when it talks about viewing from the water, it's talking about what you see, assuming some relief on conditions. And so this I did not view as a clearing. I viewed it as a maintenance type of activity to allow the vegetation to flourish. Therefore it's not a clear cutting activity. That's how I evaluated it.
So I'm looking through the section of code here, and I'm not seeing anything about with the word maintenance. Is there somewhere where you're finding that I'm not seeing it?
It's not. The word maintenance isn't in the code. I looked at the language with regards to what the activity is, and if you look at what the conditions were, they're pruning up the shrubs, but they're not taking anything out of the ground. That shrub is going to grow back. Therefore, it's an activity to allow them to rebound and be maintained so that they continue to thrive in their environment. I did not view that as a clear-cutting activity. Clear-cutting means taking everything out. For me, would also mean the roots.
Okay, and then what about the part of the code where it says that limited clearing is allowed, provided that the screening of the structures, which apparently it means the view from the lake or across the lake, is not substantially reduced. What is your?
Right, and again, I refer back to the word clearing. I don't view this as a clearing activity. I viewed it as a maintenance because the existing ground vegetation is still there. It wasn't pulling up like a shrub or a tree by the roots and putting something new in. That is all intact. And so I didn't view it as a clearing activity. It's an activity that allows that vegetation to continue. It wasn't eliminating the vegetation.
I'm not seeing anything in here about
clearing. I think is the word that I think is probably the most. It's not a clearing. I didn't view it as a clearing.
So it says that it's allowed to provide a view from the water from the principal dwelling site, but it's not allowed if it reduces the view of the greenery from across the lake or the lake. Did you see that part of the code?
Substantially reduced, I think is what you're referring to. Again, I evaluated this that it's not a clearing activity, that it's a maintenance type. It's like taking out an undergrowth to allow the upper vegetation to thrive and flourish. So I viewed it as an activity that would be allowed.
If it substantially reduces, though, the view of the property, then it's not allowed.
Again, I think you have to look at what the intent of what the activity is. They weren't taking it out and clearing it to leave it open. The activity is going to come back in its same form. It's like trimming back your shrubs. In a landscape bed, you trim them back so they can come back. That's the evaluation that I applied.
So there's a little bit of a difference between trimming and like cutting. And the trees there were actually cut; they weren't trimmed. So, and if the trees are cut, then they're going to substantially reduce the screening of the structures. So that's the question about the code that I have.
And again, what I evaluated was what the intent of the project was, and what was done, and what's going to be forthcoming. And that's if you've seen the information, that's how I applied it. That's all. It's all going to come back. The ground cover that were altered are going to be. Will be coming back in upcoming months, and I also think I recommended or suggested, maybe is a better word, that the site be viewed again following spring bloom or in a couple months to evaluate that the vegetation is thriving.
So I haven't really heard anything about the screening of the structures being reduced. They cut trees which were much higher than any ground shrubbery. So what's your response to the screening of the structures being reduced?
It's going to be coming back. I looked at this, as I said, as an interim activity. The vegetation, when the growing season takes place, that vegetation will come back.
Well, some trees though were a good 10 years old, so they're not going to come back within one season. So that would be a substantial reduction then of the screening.
Well, and as I said, that's why I also offered the comment that the site be viewed once growing season is in play, in a month or two, or at the following completion of spring bloom.
And so if you view it and you see those stumps and that the trees haven't come back to the same height they were from 10 years ago, then what do you do?
It could be evaluated based on what the code requirements are. Again, I evaluated on the intent of what I thought was done.
So I'm not seeing anything in the code about intent, but it just says limited clearing of shrubs. So how does intent fit in here?
Well, they did not clear the site. Again, I think that's probably the most apparent word. It wasn't. I did not view it as a clearing.
Yeah, it says limited clearing of shrubs and cutting, pruning, or trimming of trees of any size. So it's allowed if the screening of the structures isn't substantially reduced. So the trees that were cut were pretty tall. So the screening of the structure, apparently meaning the home, it's going to be reduced.
Well, and again, I think that follows up the comment is that it to evaluate the site in a month or two or when spring blooms to see if that's being met. I mean, that's why, again, I did not view this as a clear cutting activity. I viewed it as what the intent of what they were doing. If in fact everything was meant to come out, the whole site would be disturbed, meaning all the roots would come out and there'd be a whole new planting program. All of that, the way it was done, from how I evaluated, is that it's going to rebound during the springtime.
So in your evaluation,
and during the upcoming growing season,
those trees that were probably 4 inches in diameter, they're going to come back within a few months.
Well, and what does it also say in the code about? There's a provision in there about what the size requirement is there not?
So limited clearing of shrubs and trees less than 6 inches in diameter,
Less than 6 inches, yep.
And cutting, pruning, or trimming of trees of any size is allowed to provide a view of the water from the principal dwelling, and then stairways and picnic areas, and then provided that the screening of the structures, vehicles, or other facilities as viewed from the water, assuming some relief on condition, is not substantially reduced.
Yep.
So the trees he cut, the fact that he removed them, it would substantially reduce the screening that the greenery provides.
And again, I believe the outcome in upcoming months is that vegetation, and again, maybe this is an easy way to understand it. Like right now, all the trees have no, and shrubs, they do not have any vegetation on them. So as soon as they grow again, they'll be fully green. And that's the intent of when the activities for trimming are done, it allows it to rebound and come back.
So are you saying that these trees are all going to come back to the same size and screen the house the same way they were?
I'm saying that how I evaluated on what was done based on as evidence from the photos is that will come back again.
Yes, it also refers to cutting, pruning, and trimming. But so if they cut off the trees to the stump, about 20 trees, so that's not clear cutting?
I did not view that to be inconsistent with the language. Because it looks like all that's going to come back, or if they did take out a smaller tree, they have the opportunity to put a big tree back in, and again, that's really how I evaluated it.
So I'm not hearing that you evaluated the part about the screening of the structures. I'm not hearing that.
I viewed what I saw as a maintenance type of project that would be permissible or allowable based on the regulations, because the intent of it was not to clear the site from what I saw.
So what I'm hearing is that you didn't evaluate anything about this, whether the structures are screened or not, or if that changed. I'm not hearing any evaluation of that.
As I said, we evaluated it. Or I did as a maintenance project. It's not meant to stay that way. It's meant to be, the trimming that was done is to allow the vegetation to flourish and come back in its present form. That's how I evaluated it.
Right. So I think part of your evaluation was missing the aspect of evaluating whether the structures or the screening was effective.
Well, and as I said, the other suggestion was to evaluate it in a couple of months during the growing season to see if, in fact, that's the applicable outcome.
Right, because there's another part of the code here that needs to be taken into account. Just like the first part about the limited clearing is allowed if the screening of the structures isn't substantially reduced. That's what it seems like, that part wasn't included in the evaluation from what I'm seeing.
As I said, the comments that I provided I viewed that the activities that were done as a maintenance type of activity and not a clear cutting type of activity. And therefore that would be permissible or allowable because the vegetation is coming back.
Yeah, so I'm not really seeing that language in the code about maintenance, so that
But again, it's not clear cutting. I mean, the key word is that they weren't clearing out the site.
Yeah, so I'm not seeing anything about stuff being permitted for maintenance reasons. I'm only seeing it being permitted if it doesn't affect the screening of the structures. That's the one allowance that I'm seeing. So apparently that needs to be evaluated as well. Mm-hmm. So when you evaluate the screening of the house, and these trees with a 4-inch diameter aren't there, and you're going to be able to see the house more, then these trees are you saying these trees are going to grow back in a month's time?
What I've shared is that I evaluated what the activities consisted of and applied what I believe the intent of the project was. And the intent was not a clear-cutting type of activity. The intent was that they're doing whatever maintenance type of activities. They're not taking everything out and putting everything back. The vegetation is staying. Granted, it's changed because it's trimmed back, but the expectation is that it comes back in the same form, but it also allows it to grow. And again, my other last comment was, again, take a look at it in a couple months and see how it's doing.
Yeah, I think it doesn't take too much to see that the trees that have been cut at the base, that are probably 4-inch in diameter, some of them, they're not going to come back to the same level in a couple months. So it does, the screening of the structures would be substantially reduced, given the amount of trees that they've cut.
Well, is there anything else that I can share with you?
Well, what I'd like to know is if you intend to have an analysis as to whether the screening has been reduced or affected by what they've done.
Well, at the present time, the site looks different than what it's going to look like when the vegetation is in full growth, and the expectation is when it's in its growing season again, I believe that the determination will be that it's green again.
Yeah, it will be green, but do you think those trees are going to grow back to the same height they were at?
Well, the you have to, again, substantially, all of the vegetation on the hillside, it's all going to grow back unless it's dead or diseased.
So those trees that are 4 inches in diameter, I do think they're going to grow back in a month's time, 2 months' time?
Well, I can't say that the trees are going to grow back in a month's time. I'm looking at it more as a stand of vegetation on the hillside rather than an individual type of a tree.
Yeah, the code doesn't say anything about stuff growing back. What the code refers to is if the screening of the structures is affected. So it doesn't say anything about intent. It doesn't say anything about maintenance. It doesn't say anything about whether it'll grow back. It just says whether the screening of the structures is affected or not. That seems to be the key angle of the code.
Or whether or not the activities, again, undertaken are allowable under the code. And again, I believe you have the information that I provided, and that's really the information that I have to share.
So it does sound like you missed evaluating one part of the code. That's what it does look like from given the code.
Yep. I guess I viewed the information based on how I believe it should be applied. Based on what they were doing.
And based on intent.
Based on what the intent of the project was.
Yeah.
And what the outcome will be once the growing season gets up and running.
Yeah, so it does look like that you added some things to the code and then you didn't evaluate some of them. That's what it looks like. So intent, you added maintenance, you added what it'll be like in the future, but none of that is in the code. Only information in the code is whether the screening of the structures is substantially reduced.
Well, and I evaluated based on the activities that were undertaken and whether or not they are advisable and allowable under the code, and that's where I landed based on what was done. And again, it's an informal opinion. Yes,
well, they're using it. They're relying on it when your opinion doesn't take into account all the code. So, okay, so what I see, all right, I'll be, have any more questions, I'll get back in touch.
All right, thank you for your time.
Yeah, bye.
Yeah, bye now.